Good evening. I'm Driti Atri, and tonight on Skyline, the world is entering a new phase where wars are no longer fought only with missiles or bombs. Now, cables under the ocean, they have become weapons. Oil routes can become battlefields, drone attacks can bankrupt superpowers, and secret meetings between world leaders may decide the future of entire region. Tonight, Mr. Donald Trump, he walks through China's most secret political garden with Mr. Xi Jinping. Iran threatens the world's digital lifeline. US Senator openly questions whether America is getting trapped into another endless war. Israel is threatening legal action against the New York Times. And behind every headline tonight, one question is growing louder. Is the world entering a new era of invisible warfare? So let's decode it. Well, first of all, imagine waking up tomorrow morning and suddenly your UPI, it stops working. ATM stops responding, flights are delayed because airline systems are down. Stock markets freeze, video calls disconnect, entire governments struggle to communicate. Not because of a cyber attack, not because satellites failed, but because somebody damaged cables laying very silently at the bottom of an ocean. Well, that is the growing fear tonight after Iran warned about vulnerabilities surrounding undersea internet cables near the Strait of Hormuz. And suddenly the world is being forced to understand something that most of the people, they never think about. The internet is not floating magically in the air. It is physical infrastructure. Thousands of massive submarine cables carry more than 95% of global internet traffic. Every WhatsApp message, banking transaction, military signal, YouTube upload, and stock trade, it depends on those cables. Now look at the geography here. Many of these cables pass through these dangerous choke points like the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, Bab al-Mandab Strait, and the Strait of Hormuz. These are already some of the world's most sensitive oil routes, right? But now experts are warning that they are also digital choke points. Even if a few cables are damaged, entire regions could face internet slowdown or communication blackouts, including the US. In fact, last year, cable disruption in the Red Sea reportedly disrupted nearly 1/4 of the internet traffic between Asia and Europe. Now that gives you an idea of how fragile the system really is, right? And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you here, repairing these cables, it's not easy. Special repair ships are needed. International permissions are required. Repair can take days or even weeks. Now imagine trying to repair cables during an active military conflict. Well, that is why governments are deeply worried tonight, because if tensions between Iran, Israel and the US escalates further, the global economy itself, it could get dragged into the crisis. Financial markets depend on ultra-fast internet signal. Oil companies depend on secure communications system. Military depend on real-time coordination through these networks. And that's not it. Even modern drone warfare depends heavily on undersea cable system. And perhaps the most dangerous part is this. If a cable is damaged underwater, proving who did it, that becomes extremely difficult. Was it a sabotage? Was it an accident? Was it a hostile state? Or was it a private actor? Now that uncertainty itself, it is creating panic and perhaps escalation. Tonight, the world is slowly realizing the modern civilization is sitting on invisible wires beneath the oceans. And these wires may now become targets in geopolitical warfare. But you know what? While tensions grow under the ocean, another extraordinary geopolitical drama, it was unfolding above ground, inside China's most secret political compound. Ladies and gentlemen, US President Mr. Donald Trump, he walked into a place where very few foreign leaders were ever invited. No, we are not talking about Great Hall of the People, not a normal diplomatic venue, but Zhongnone, China's hidden political nerve center, a heavily guarded leadership compound behind the forbidden city where China's top Communist Party leadership works and they live. And you know, this meeting, it was not just diplomacy, it was symbolism, carefully choreographed symbolism. Mr. Xi Jinping, he personally walked Mr. Trump through ancient imperial gardens filled with century-old trees. In fact, at one point, Mr. Xi reportedly told Mr. Trump that these trees are over 200 to 300 years old. After that, Mr. Trump asked, "They live that long?" Then Mr. Xi, he calmly replied that some trees inside the compound are over 1000 years old. Now, this may sound like a casual conversation, but in Chinese political culture, symbolism matters a lot. Mr. Xi was subtly projecting the image of a civilization that thinks in centuries, not election cycle. Ancient trees, imperial history, long continuity, that was the message here. And then came another revealing moment. Mr. Trump reportedly asked Mr. Xi whether many foreign leaders had ever visited this place or not. He replied very rarely. And then he mentioned Mr. Vladimir Putin. Again, that was not accidental, it cannot be. China was signaling who it considers part of its trusted inner diplomatic circle. This place is often compared to the White House or Kremlin. But unlike those places, China almost never uses it for any diplomatic optics. Well, the compound, it carries a lot of political meaning because it has been home to Chinese power for decades now. From Mao's to modern Communist Party leadership. And while the visuals looked very peaceful, roses, lakes, ancient pathways, tea ceremonies, the actual discussions, they were deeply serious. Taiwan was reportedly placed at the center of the talks. Mr. Xi warned that disagreements over Taiwan could lead to clashes and conflicts. Iran, it was another major issue. Mr. Trump later claimed Mr. Xi agreed not to supply military equipments to Tehran. Oil routes, sanctions, and Strait of Hormuz, they were also part of the discussion because China depends heavily on the West Asian energy supply. This is what is making this whole meeting so fascinating. On the surface, it looked calm, elegant, but beneath the smiles, two superpowers were quietly discussing global war. In fact, military escalation, geopolitical survival, and tonight the world is paying close attention because when Washington and Beijing speak carefully, global markets, militaries, and allies, they listen very carefully. And while Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi, they smiled for cameras in Beijing, back in Washington, America's own lawmakers, they were demanding answers about a conflict many fear could spiral out of control. Ladies and gentlemen, the atmosphere inside the Senate Armed Service Committee, it was tensed, very tense, because American lawmakers are now openly asking questions that many civilians are asking very privately. What exactly is the US strategy against Iran? How long could this conflict continue? And is America once again drifting towards another prolonged Middle East war? In fact, the top US military commanders faced very sharp questioning from senators over the escalating Iran crisis and growing instability around the Strait of Hormuz. Senators pressed officials about civilian casualties, missile threat, naval deployment, oil disruption, and legal authority behind military operation. In fact, some lawmakers, they wanted to know whether the White House has a long-term plan. Others worried that the whole situation could spiral into a direct regional war involving multiple countries. And one location that kept on dominating the whole hearing, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway may look small on the map, but it is one of the most important economic arteries in the world. Nearly 20% of the global oil passes through it. Well, if military conflict disrupts shipping there, oil prices could surge globally within hours. Insurance premiums for the ships could rise sharply. In fact, energy markets could panic, and countries already struggling with inflation may suddenly face another economic shock. Several senators reportedly compared the current situation to the past American wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that comparison, it matters politically because many Americans remain deeply skeptical about long military campaign overseas. Lawmakers repeatedly asked military officials, what is the exit strategy? What are the objectives? Well, how do you prevent escalation? Those are very difficult questions because modern conflicts often expand slowly instead of exploding suddenly. And yes, another major concern during the hearing was China. Beijing continues purchasing Iranian oil while simultaneously presenting itself as a diplomatic stabilizer. Well, some senators worry that China may benefit very strategically if America becomes militarily distracted in West Asia again. Because every crisis consuming Washington's attention potentially gives Beijing some more room to expand influence elsewhere, specifically in Asia and around Taiwan. So tonight, what we are witnessing, it is not just military debate. It is a debate about America's future role in the whole world. Should Washington continue acting as a global military policeman, or should it avoid another open-ended confrontation? Even inside America's political system, there is no clear consensus tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Donald Trump, he has now made a very remarkable and controversial statement. He suggested that securing Iran's enriched uranium, it may partly be about public relations. Yes, President of the US openly used that phrase while discussing one of the world's most dangerous nuclear issues. He told Fox News that he would feel better if the US got hold of Iran's uranium stockpile. And then he added another line, distracting major global attention. We will get it. Now, why does this matter so much? Because enriched uranium is at the center of global standoff with Iran. Uranium enriched to very high level, it can potentially be used for nuclear weapons if processed further. Here, Iran insists that its nuclear program is powerful. The US and Israel strongly disagree and fear that Tehran could move closer towards nuclear weapons capability. And that disagreement, it has fueled years of sanction, covert operation, cyber attack, assassination, military tension. You know, the problem tonight is that nobody publicly knows exactly where all of Iran's highly enriched uranium is located. Here, some experts believe that portion could be hidden deep underground in fortified facility. Others suspect Iran may have moved the material before previous strike occurred. Recovering or destroying such material, and that too during wartime, it would be incredibly different and incredibly dangerous. Here, Trump also suggested that bombing could remain an option in future though. But, it is controversial because once leaders, they start discussing uranium stockpile, military strike, ongoing war in the same conversation, fears of escalation rise rapidly. Investors react, oil prices react. Well, even America's own allies, they become uneasy because any direct war involving nuclear infrastructure, it can have unpredictable risk. Well, this war is not really new. This entire crisis also traces back to the collapse of 2015 Iran nuclear deal negotiated under then-President Barack Obama. Mr. Trump withdrew that particular agreement during his first term, arguing that it was weak. Iran later increased uranium enrichment level after the collapse of the deal. And now, years later, the nuclear issue has returned to the center of global tension once again. Now, talking about the fifth segment of our story, well, a cheap drone versus billion-dollar military machine. That is the uncomfortable reality modern militaries are now facing. And tonight, even America's top commanders, they are admitting that the battlefield has fundamentally changed. CENTCOM commander Admiral Brad Cooper, he recently said that the United States has now flipped the cost curve after facing repeated wave of low-cost drone attacks linked to Iran and Iran-backed groups. Now that phrase, it may sound technical, but it reveals a massive strategic problem inside modern warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, for years, advanced militaries like the US relied heavily on extremely expensive missile defense system. The idea was simple here. If a threat appears, destroy it immediately using superior technology. But then came the drone revolution. Suddenly, small groups with limited budgets could launch cheap drones costing a few $1,000s, while forcing America and its allies to fire interceptor missiles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Economically, that becomes unsustainable very, very quickly. Here, Iran understood this weakness extremely well. Instead of directly confronting the US military in a very traditional way, where America has overwhelming air power and naval strength, Iran and its regional allies increasingly relied on drones, proxy groups, and asymmetrical tactics. Swarm of cheap drones, it became a way to exhaust very expensive Western defense system. Well, even if some drones are intercepted, the financial pressure alone that creates the problem. And this is not just a West Asia story anymore. The Ukraine war has also shown how drones are transforming warfare globally. Cheap unmanned systems, they are now being used for surveillance, kamikaze attack, in fact, battlefield coordination and even psychological warfare. Militaries around the globe are racing to redesign the defense system because the old model of relying only on billion-dollar platform, it suddenly looks vulnerable. And now the US military is trying to adapt here. Admiral Cooper, he said America has flipped the cost curve, meaning the Pentagon is developing cheaper and smarter ways to counter the drone threat. And that includes the AI-powered detection system, low-cost interceptor, electronic warfare tool, and faster battlefield response system. Because the future of battlefield, it may not belong only to fighter jets and aircraft carriers anymore. It may belong to whosoever can mass-produce autonomous system faster and cheaper. And that realization is deeply unsettling for military planners today, because if low-cost drones can challenge superpowers today, imagine what future AI-powered drone swarms could actually look like tomorrow. The era of warfare dominated only by tanks and jets may already be changing in front of our eyes. But even as Mr. Trump claims that China promised not to help Iran militarily, new reports are raising uncomfortable questions about Beijing's real intention. That's right, US President Mr. Donald Trump emerged from Beijing claiming that Mr. Xi Jinping, he agreed not to supply military equipment to Iran. Now, on the surface, that sounded like a major diplomatic breakthrough, right? But almost immediately, there was a lot of doubt that started growing, because many analysts believe that China's relationship with Iran is far more too important for Beijing to simply walk away like that. China today remains one of Iran's biggest economic lifelines. Beijing continues to purchase large amount of discounted Iranian oil despite sanction pressure. Here, reports also suggest that smaller Chinese teapot refineries continue processing sanctioned crude oil because it is significantly cheaper. Now, for Iran, China provides economic breathing room. For China, Iran provides stable energy supplies at very discounted rate. So the relationship, it is deeply strategic, and that too for both the sides. And this is where things are complicated. Publicly, China presents itself as a stabilizing global power, calling for peace and negotiations. Mr. Xi Jinping, he often speaks about diplomacy, multipolarity, and avoiding the conflict. But critics argue that Beijing quietly benefits when America becomes militarily distracted in West Asia. Because every crisis consuming Washington's attention, it potentially gives China one more room to strengthen influence elsewhere, specifically in Asia and around Taiwan. Well, there is also broader geopolitical calculation at play here. China depends heavily on energy imports flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Any regional instability, it threatens China's economic interests directly. And this is why Beijing wants stability now, but also wants to avoid appearing aligned completely with Washington's strategy here. China carefully balances relationship across the whole West Asia, maintaining ties with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, and Israel simultaneously. And then came Mr. Xi's warning during the summit. Taiwan was reportedly placed at the center of discussions. Mr. Xi warned that support for Taipei, it could eventually lead to clashes and conflict. Now that line, it really matters because Taiwan remains one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world today. Beijing views Taiwan as a part of China. The US supports Taiwan militarily and politically, and both the sides are watching each other very carefully. So tonight, analysts are asking a bigger question. Did Mr. Trump genuinely secure a diplomatic concession from Mr. Xi, or did China simply offer reassuring words while continuing its broader strategic balancing act? Because in modern geopolitics, public statements and private realities are often very, very different. Ladies and gentlemen, while geopolitical tensions intensify globally, another explosive controversy erupted involving Israel and one of America's most powerful newspapers. Ladies and gentlemen, the Israeli government is now threatening legal action against the New York Times after a highly controversial report alleged a lot of bad incidents with the Palestinian detainees. The article, written by a very prominent communist, Nicholas Kristof, he described the testimonies from the Palestinians who claimed that they were, treated very badly by the settlers, by the soldiers, by the prison guards. The allegation, it triggered immediate outrage and political debate as well, but inside Israel this time. Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu and Foreign Minister Mr. Saar, they reportedly described the article as one of the most distorted lies ever published against Israel. Israeli officials accused the newspaper of relying on unverified testimonies connected to Hamas-linked network. And in the meantime, the newspaper defended its reporting very strongly and described the legal threat as part of a broader attempt to intimidate journalism that is very critical of Israeli policies. And you know what? This controversy, it matters far beyond one newspaper article, because information itself has now become a battlefield in modern conflict. Every image, testimony, investigation, and headline, it can influence global public opinion. Governments do understand this very carefully, and that is why media narrative now plays a huge role in international diplomacy, protest, sanction pressure, and even military strategy. The Gaza-Israel war, it has already become one of the most emotionally polarizing conflicts in the world. Protests have erupted globally. Universities, politicians, activists, in fact, media organizations remain deeply divided over how the conflict is portrayed here. Allegations involving abuse inside detention system, it creates specifically intense geopolitical environment because they raise questions about human rights, wartime conduct, and accountability. And finally, tonight, the most symbolic moment of the Trump-Xi summit may not have happened during the formal negotiations at all, but during a very subtle exchange caught on camera. That's right, during the first major Trump-Xi bilateral meeting in China, and that too in years, Mr. Xi Jinping appeared to subtly reference the cost of the confrontation and America's ongoing tension involving Iran. And many observers, they believe that the message, it was carefully aimed at Washington. Mr. Xi reportedly spoke about the dangers and cost of the conflict, while Mr. Trump responded by speaking about fantastic future for both the nations. But beneath the diplomatic language, the strategic tension, it was unmistakable. The timing of this meeting, it matters enormously. Why? Because America is already dealing with instability involving Iran, rising military costs, pressure in the Strait of Hormuz, and growing domestic political division over the foreign policy. And at the very same time, China is watching very closely as Washington tries to manage crisis across multiple regions simultaneously. Here, Beijing do understands that prolonged instability can stretch America militarily and their economic resource. And Mr. Xi's comments appeared designed to highlight exactly that reality. China often presents itself as a power focused on stability, trade, long-term strategy, while portraying the US as increasingly trapped in costly confrontations abroad. Even subtle diplomatic language from Chinese leadership, it can carry layered geopolitical messaging. And at the very same time, Mr. Trump, he tried projecting optimism, saying that both the countries could have fantastic future. Now that kind of reflects another complicated truth. Despite rivalry, the US and China remains deeply emotionally connected. American companies depend heavily on Chinese manufacturing. China depends heavily on access to the global market and stable trade route. Neither side wants direct confrontation, but neither side wants to appear weak. And this kind of creates one of the most dangerous geopolitical situations possible. Strategic competition without full trust. America and China are competing economically, militarily, technologically, and diplomatically at the same time. Taiwan remains a major flashpoint. Artificial intelligence and semiconductor wars are intensifying. Trade tensions continue, and even the Iran conflict is becoming part of a broader US-China rivalry. So in the end, tonight the world, it feels increasingly multipolar, unstable, interconnected. A crisis in West Asia affects energy markets in Asia. US-China tensions affects global trade. Drone warfare changes military planning everywhere. Undersea cables suddenly become strategic assets, and the world leaders are carefully signaling power through symbolism, diplomacy, and public messaging. So, that is the biggest story tonight. The world order is shifting in real time, and every headline that we covered, it is part of that transformation.